If you've been watching my channel for a little while, you may remember one of my earliest videos was talking about when wild animals strike. If you haven't seen that one yet, well, there's a link to it right there for you. Enjoy some of the stories from one of my very first videos. But of course, that's far from the only stories I have about animals in the parks. When you work at parks, you're going to run into animals, especially when one of the parks is a combination theme park and zoo, and the other one's out in the middle of the woods. So here's a lot more stories about wild animals in the parks. At Busch Gardens, you may remember, I worked on a ride called Rhino Rally. Rhino Rally was a big land safari that drove around through all these different wild animal pens, and you would encounter up close several different kinds of animals. There were elephants, there were scimitar horned oryx, there were flamingos. The animals were free roaming. They were free to pretty much go where they would want. It wasn't unusual for us as we came around by the scimitar horned oryx and the zebras, for the zebras in particular to just stand in the driveway and just look at us. And we'd have to wait, and hopefully they would get out of the way in a hurry, and these little cheap horns, beep, beep, didn't exactly intimidate the zebras. But we would have to get stuck waiting for them sometimes. One of the other animals that was out there on Rhino Rally was the Cape buffalo. Now, if you're not familiar with the Cape buffalo, they're not a real friendly animal. They're actually rather mean. So we had them on the other side of a little waterway and then a big fence, so they were kind of fenced off and they couldn't get to us. But that didn't prevent them from staring us down. I remember Morton a few times coming by and looking over to point out the Cape buffalo, and he was standing there just going, "Yeah, you just stay over there, we'll stay here, we're all happy that way." The rhino pen was always a lot of fun too. They were in a sectioned off area, so they didn't intermingle with the others, but we'd still drive right up to them and they could come up to the truck, they could bump the truck. But the funny thing about the rhino pen was as you drove in, the rhinos had essentially been litter box trained. And there was a spot that you would drive right around where the rhinos would go do their duty. You could smell it all the way in that area. So we would kind of drive by and say, "Yes, folks, that is Mount Poop. Get a load of those fresh smells of Africa." Mm-mm. And usually you'd have somebody in the safari truck starting to gag a little bit. Disney World didn't have a whole lot of animals. I talked about the gators in one of my other videos. It's Florida, folks. There's gators. There's no getting rid of them. But Disney had a couple other animals that you could quite commonly see in the parks. Out around the courtyards around the castle, it wasn't unusual for them to have wild rabbits come out onto the lawns. And they would stay a little ways away out where people couldn't get to them. But you'd see them fairly commonly out there. The other thing that there's a lot of at Disney World is ducks. And of course, springtime comes and ducks would start to breed, and so they would make nests all along the waterways around the castle. They would also occasionally make nests in other places. One time I was shooting pictures over at the partner statue in front of the castle. It had a big, huge planter around it. And I remember one morning coming out bright and early and realized that there was a little problem with the planter. There was a mama duck sitting in the middle of it on top of her nest, and she wasn't going anywhere. It's Florida, it's hot, and this poor duck starts to stress out, and it starts to overheat because there's no water nearby. As cast members, we would usually carry bottled water in our belts to keep us from dehydrating. So a couple of us managed to find a lid from something, and we put some water out and kind of slid it over in front of the duck to let it get some water so it didn't dehydrate. And then we'd rope it off and make sure that nobody went near it. So we had to step back a little bit to get our pictures for a while. At least until maintenance and some other people were able to come out and able to gently rescue the duck and take it and its nest someplace safe. But then, of course, all those eggs would hatch and you'd have ducklings everywhere. And it was fun to watch them swimming in the waterways. Sometimes they weren't just in the waterways. It wasn't unusual for them to go parading around in the whole courtyard area and for us cast members to have to play duck patrol and block off walkways and keep them safe from other people walking by. But it was always fun when the ducklings were there. The biggest place that I really got to work with animals was Silver Dollar City, which was really kind of funny because there weren't any planned animal encounters on the train. But out in the woods in the middle of the Ozarks, you've got lots of them. A daily thing was for us to see deer out in the woods. And especially during spring, it would be really neat because you would be going by and you would see 4 or 5 deer standing just off to the side of the train tracks. With all those deer, it wouldn't be unusual, too, for occasionally one of them to get someplace it shouldn't. I can remember one day I was out working on the train. We started to hear the radio chattering a whole lot. "Shut down the Lost River! Quick! Drop the water!" Apparently a deer had actually jumped over the fence and into the rapids ride. And with the rapids and the water flowing, it couldn't get out. So they had to shut down the ride, drain the river, and be able to let all the water get out so they could get this poor deer out of the lost river and then restart the ride. They did get it all drained out and they did get the deer out of there and it was just fine. Of course, there were squirrels in abundance. Chipmunks too. In fact, we had one chipmunk family that lived right underneath our train station and they like to pop out of the drain pipe during the middle of the day. You'd be standing out there talking to the guests and all of a sudden here's this chipmunk down at your foot. Hi, what you doing? Of course they're after popcorn and other stuff that people have dropped. There was a family of raccoons that actually lived up on the top of the flooded mine. If you get there early in the morning sometimes, you would see Mama Raccoon with her baby raccoons trailing behind. One of the other animals that I got used to seeing were groundhogs. Commonly out here in the Ozarks, they'll get about this big. But out on the train and around Silver Dollar City, we would see them sometimes as much as, huge. And not exactly fast movers either. Sometimes we'd be going by on the train with a trainload of passengers and they'd be sitting on the side. They didn't always get out of the way. I can remember one morning we were out doing our maintenance run on the train. As we stop at one point, I remember the engineer popping over onto the radio and say,
"We're going to have to delay the opening just a little bit."
Apparently a groundhog had not gotten out of the way of the train and it hit it and it had created quite a mess. It took a little while to clean it up. I'm happy I was at the back of the train where I didn't have to see it. We had a snapping turtle over the roundhouse one time. Snakes galore. We had one huge black snake that would hang around the robber shack. This thing must have been 6-7 feet long and probably about 5 inches across. It was big. It wouldn't be unusual to be in the middle of the robbery show and have people start yelling, "Look! Snake!" and to turn around and see this big black snake crawling across the back. There was another time that a snake got loose in the roundhouse, and the engineers were all running out trying to get away from this snake. I never did find out what kind it was, but they were a little bit scared of this thing crawling around in there. Probably one of the scariest stories, though, involved one night. We were working Moonlight Madness, which is when the park stays open late at night for a couple weeks in the summer. At the end of the night, you ride the train around, and we had a couple lights on different scenes in the woods, and you would have to stop and turn those lights off before you got to head home for the night. I'm riding the train around, and I don't remember why, but the robbers ended up turning off the lights on the scene, and we were going to come by and pick them up that night. As we come around the bend where the wrecked train is that they were waiting at, we hear them yelling, "Hurry up! Hurry up!" Why? What's going on? And we get up next to them, stop the train, and they immediately hop on, and one of them grabs the microphone to talk to the engineer and says, "Go! Go!" What's going on? What's wrong with you? Apparently, while they were out there with the flashlights and they were turning the lights off on the scene, they'd heard some noise, turned their flashlights at it, and here were a couple of eyes glowing at them. And then they got a look at the size of the body that was attached to the eyes, and lo and behold, they found our local mountain lion who was out there checking them out. That was as close as I ever came to seeing a mountain lion, but I heard that it got encountered a couple other times too. One of the funniest things we ever had happen was with one of those multitudes of squirrels. We had a couple that would hang around the train station all the time looking for whatever handouts they could get. We were out there one year doing a training day where we were working through different things and trying to get stuff ready. One of our managers decided, hey, let's have a little fun. These squirrels are almost tame. They come up to us. So much so I'd actually dubbed one of them Fred because of how often he hung around. And he decided that I'm going to feed the squirrel. He put some popcorn right on his hand, holds out there and just waits for the squirrel to crawl up on his hand to get the popcorn. And so the squirrel, surprisingly enough, does. And then gets spooked and jumps and scratches his hand. Good job, Josh. Go up to first aid, get it checked out, and then we'll come back and we'll finish training because he's our manager. He's supposed to be the one training us. He heads on up to first aid, and we wait, and we wait, and we wait. And then he comes back down, not in a happy mood, slams a couple things.
Because I haven't had a rabies shot, I have to go to the hospital and go get a rabies shot.
And so our lead, the guy who's supposed to be doing the training, the guy who's supposed to know better, gets scratched by a squirrel and has to go off to the hospital to get rabies shots. And we basically have to train ourselves for the day. We were all veterans. We all really knew what we were going to be doing anyways and how to do it. So we refreshed ourselves and had somebody else sign us off. Josh learned the hard way that day. Don't feed the squirrels. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this other collection of stories about animals at the theme parks. And we saw all sorts of them and had some great moments and had some not great ones too. Please don't forget to like and share. If you haven't subscribed already, hit that subscribe button right now. Comment below. I'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks so much.